Hello and welcome to Sensei podcast. This is Manos Brilakis discussing with leaders in the field of CTO and complex PCI. Sensei means teacher or master in Japanese. The goal of the Sensei podcast is to help you learn and improve in CTO and complex PCI so that you can become the best that you can be and offer your patients the best possible results. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sensei Podcast. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Katherine Kunkel from Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Katherine, thanks again for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you.
And, Dr. Kunkel has been a great CTO operator. You've been at Piedmont for how long?
2.5 years now.
Perfect. So she's still into the practice, but also not that far away from the training. So it can give the perspectives of how the practice is starting and how the steps involved in learning this. But maybe we'll go back one step. How do you decide to do complex PCI and spend the extra year and time and stress to learn complex PCI?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. It is such an honor to have this conversation with you. So so when I started my interventional training at Penn, it was a 2-year program. So everyone at Penn does 2 years in the lab, and they do interventional and structural. And so I kind of had signed up for that in the beginning. And at the time, and I know that's changed since then, but it was not really a lab that was doing CTO, PCI, or kind of, it was doing some surgical turn down work, but CTO, PCI really was not on the menu at that time. And so I have this very vivid memory when I was kind of in the first of my 2 interventional years of going to there was these things called Angio Club. So Philadelphia would have dinners once a month, and people from all over different training programs would come, and there would be an invited speaker. And so I remember we were in a basement meeting room of a steakhouse, of course, because it's interventional cardiologists. And Bill Nicholson was the invited speaker. And he starts showing cases of CTO PCI. And it was just like a light bulb went off. I was like, what is this? And, you live in fear of kind of dissections when you don't have ways to fix it. And so I kind of, the big aha moment for me was a stingray case. I was like, what? You dissect on purpose, and then you it was just so elegant and beautiful. I was like, maybe I could do that. Like that just kind of struck my fancy of this like whole world of PCI that I had never seen before. And so I just started getting curious about it. I said, well, let me start reading a little bit about CTO PCI. And so we had to do a topic review presentation, all the fellows on a rotating basis. I said, why don't I do mine on CTO PCI? And I didn't exactly get, kicked off the stage at the end of it, but I was like, this is so interesting. Why don't I read about it and give a talk on it? And then I started sending myself to conferences. I was, I think at the time, I was like, I want to go to CTO Plus. So, I was like, okay, I guess you can have a day off. And so I, bought a train ticket and sent myself to CTO Plus and sat in the audience and didn't know a single soul in the room and kind of watched CTO PCI on the big screen. It was just like, wow, this is amazing. And then, kind of through a friend of a friend, got connected with Kate Kearney. And I remember I had this really influential phone call with her, and I was walking my dog in Philadelphia, and I just walked around the same block over and over as I was talking to Kate about what is CTO PCI and what has her training pathway and what training pathways exist and what sort of career options are there, and just like this whole world that I had never seen before. So anyway, I ended up going to complications and meeting some people in real life, and then just started saying, I think this whole world is technically really fascinating, and at the same time, really just seeing all of these patients with disease who didn't have options. And, the structural stuff. And so at the same time, I'm doing a structural fellowship.
So you still did the structural?
So yes, because, everyone, you committed. It's a 2-year program. So you commit to the 2 years. And I'm not the sort of person who kind of backs out on a commitment. And so you finish everything. But, at the same time, you're seeing all these patients with complex coronary disease. And became pretty clear, I'll trade you a TAVR for a distal left main, those sorts of swaps you make as a fellow. But that was kind of, the combination of kind of seeing the world of CTO, PCI in kind of a different light, kind of voting with my feet of always wanting to be in the coronary space. And then kind of understanding that there were opportunities to fill my toolbox deeper to treat this really undertreated group of patients who kind of were at this place where it's kind of beta blockers and hospice, or beta blockers and struggling along. Maybe there's something else you can do to help these patients. And it really appealed to me that there was kind of the opportunity to provide something to someone who didn't have an option otherwise. And so it's a long-winded way of saying I started looking into CTO fellowship programs because, I knew that if you're really passionate about something, you'll get there. And before CTO fellowships existed, people learned how to do CTO PCI. It just took them a while, right?
Sure.
And I viewed a CTO fellowship or a CHIP fellowship as an opportunity to kind of push fast forward on the learning curve, to really concentrate a lot of experiences up front, to be able to kind of start practice at a little bit of a different place than I would have having just graduated with the training without the CTO focus. And so that kind of led me to exploring what fellowships existed around the country at the time. I emailed many very famous and scary people, yourself included. Oh my God, am I really hitting send here? Are there any typos? And so then that led me to ultimately Henry Ford, where I did my training.
Perfect. Well, again, that's, as you say, a long-winded way, but at the same time, that's a more and more common way of getting into the area, right? Because before, there was no option, and essentially people learned just by doing cases and getting some proctoring. So this is the new way of doing this. But what's fascinating to me is you were in an institution that wasn't doing as much CTO, but just the random event of happening to go to that, which you might not have gone to that presentation, right, by Bill Nicholson, and getting excited about the CTO PCI. I mean, that made such a big impact on you, and you wanted to pursue it. But you already had 2 years of training. You had an extra year. How much was that a obstacle, or was it easy for you to swallow? Again, we were training forever, right? And then that's an extra year, so PGY 9 now or something like that. So obviously that's a long way, but how did you manage that? And
so at the time I was, if anyone was set up well to do it, it was me, because I was single. I didn't have kids in school. I wasn't paying for daycare. I wasn't having to uproot a spouse. So it was kind of not as big of an ask for me to move myself and my dog to, a different city for 1 year that actually was in driving distance to my family. So, and I think I, from the very beginning, had kind of adopted a very long kind of vision, and the idea of paying 1 year now, I think for me, doing that year changed everything for me. But when I talk to people, I talk to a lot of fellows about whether or not they want to do a CHIP year. And it has an opportunity cost, right? Especially if you have things like kids and a spouse who are coming with you, but also financially, right? The opportunity cost is
salary attending versus,
Yeah. And so, a lot of people, we're talking a hefty 6-figure difference in income. And so you have to, it's not like, oh gosh, you're losing out on money. It's just be thoughtful about the decision. So if you think that CHIP and CTO is your passion and that's what you want the focus of your career to be, absolutely an investment that is completely worth it and will pay back your entire career. But, if you think, I just want to gain a couple more skills and be a more confident coronary operator, I don't know that for me, the value proposition is there. I mean, when I finished fellowship, I think it certainly cost me some job offers. I was very clear. I wanted to do CHIP CTO. I was interested in coronary work, and sure, I know how to put in a TAVR valve. Sure, I can close a PFO. I can do all of those things, but my passion is CHIP CTO, and you should know that when you're hiring me. And that certainly cost me some job offers, but I think it ultimately led me to a job that fit really well for me.
Perfect. So it was a plus and a minus, I guess. So it's an investment. There's all these downsides of spending an extra year in training, the income loss, the extra time, but also in terms of positions, then you're limiting yourself to some extent to positions that offer that pathway. Since since you've done all this training, you don't want to give it up and then do a job that doesn't offer the same opportunities. Although you can build it, but it's different than if it's not on the program description.
It's also super fun. I think we don't talk about that as much. We talk about kind of the financial and the time costs and the career trajectory change, but it was the most fun year I've ever had. I mean, it was, which is funny to say, living in cold, dark Detroit during COVID. So pretty much my entire life was my apartment in the hospital. But I love being on that really steep part of the learning curve. And you have enough skills that you can hit it. I'd been in the lab every day for 2 years. So you really you hit the learning curve at a sweet spot and you can see yourself getting better every day. And you can do these really challenging, interesting things with an operator on your right shoulder who will say, no, don't do that, or coach you through it. Or when something bad happens, you have someone to help take over, in the worst case scenario. So it's very freeing. It's very fun. So that was just another part of it to me. I just every day I was just looking forward to the cases.
Wonderful. Well, I actually joke with our CTO fellows saying when the cases go after 4 or 5 hours, look, you can be a structural fellow, be at home now, and still they don't get discouraged. So I guess you're right. There must be something about it. Now, going back one step. So you were in cardiology, interventional cardiology, and the difficulty is part of it. But when the complications happen and when things don't go as planned, because, when you do these cases, unlike most of the non-CTO complex cases, it's going to be fine. But these ones, you have a real chance of failure. There's a real chance of complication, much more than before. How do you handle with these moments?
It's really hard. It's really hard. I don't think it's gotten a lot easier, to be honest. So for me, when I'm doing a case, there's the complication that happens that you don't see coming. And those are kind of devastating in one way. But then there's the complication that you potentially see happening, right? That's every step in the case. You are, for me at least, I am weighing failure versus safety, right? And, a lot of the time you're plodding along and it's safe, move on, safe, move on, safe, move on. But then at some point in time, this weight of the scales start changing, right? And I think you have to figure out who you are as an operator and what you're more comfortable with, failure or a complication. And I don't think either of us want either of those things, right? We want to win every time. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to decide who you are as an operator. And I think at least at this point in my career, and I'm sure it will change over time, I want to be a safe operator. When I was in my fellowship, my mom would say, if I had a CTO, who would you want to do my CTO? And, think about it really hard, all these amazing world-class operators, and it wasn't the person most likely to get the artery open. For me, it was the person who had a very good chance of getting an artery open, but would give me my mom back, And so I think for me, and that means I open less arteries probably, right? That means I'm probably a little less successful. And it's taken me a while to be okay with that. And maybe it holds me back a little bit. And that's where I'm working, right? That's my purposeful practice. The thing that I think about a lot is where do I live? And I used to really judge myself a lot for that, of being, timid or not brave. I say, well, okay, why don't we just take the judgment back for a second and just say, okay, this is where I am. Why? And am I okay with that? Do I want to evolve that? And I think that's where, that's kind of where I am. I struggle with complications. I still do. They're really, really hard for me. I think one thing I've been able to do is, keep big things big and small things small. And I've really stopped beating myself up about complications that are not as long-term clinically significant. I used to be the sort who, gosh, you dissect a radial artery, or you get a femoral hematoma, or you have a little wire perf and you need to give protamine. Oh, why did I do that? Now I'm like, okay, this happened. What can I learn from it? Move on. I'm not going to beat myself up. But the big complications are still hard. I think I've learned my tendencies, right? So when something really bad happens, my tendency is to turn inward, and I need to not do that, right? I think when we all have a complication, we each have our own response, and mine tends to be shame.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to talk
Most
about it.
people's.
I don't want to talk about it. I know that I shouldn't have done X or Y or Z in retrospect. I certainly wish I had made a different choice. But so I don't want to talk about it. And that's wrong, right? You have to have trust in people that you can go through this with, not to tell you, oh, you did everything perfectly. But to be there with you and like go through the process with you. I think one of the other big things I've learned is that your intention matters, right? I know that sounds silly, but it took me a little while to believe after a particularly, impactful complication. You kind of like, how do I keep doing this job? You know? And what matters is you went to work today to help people. You did everything you could to help someone, and you were fighting for them, and you were doing the best you could with what you had at the time. And that matters. And so I think kind of working through all of that has really helped me kind of not focus on every little thing. And then when something that does matter comes up, to kind of be a little more balanced, to not just withdraw and to withdraw into myself and just beat myself up, and to know that having a complication doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you a bad operator. Honestly, what it means when you react like this means you really care about your patients, which I do. So.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the common responses for many people, including myself, that something happens, then it takes a while to want to talk about it sometimes because, you feel like, oh, I did this, I shouldn't have done it. I think the intention matters. There are some people, some very prominent people, Masa Yamane, one of the best in the world, he went to quit CTO PCI after he had a stent, acute thrombosis of a donor vessel. So it's not something unique. But you're right. I mean, shame grows when there's no communication and you think that you're the only person on the planet who does that. And I do agree that intention matters as well. And to your previous point about how much to push, there's no right answer to this, right? I mean, the reality of it is that it is an elective procedure. So most of the time, the number one consideration should be safety. And then if you don't feel comfortable doing an extra step, then maybe you should think twice about it. Now, people are saying, well, you should feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And obviously that's true to growth, but there's a balance there, right? Because if you're doing something that you're really not feeling comfortable at all, maybe that's not the right thing to do. Maybe that's the time to get a proctor or talk to some people before, again, it's I think it's shared by everyone, including myself, this inner discussion and then bringing it out. But let's say something happens, then do you talk to your colleagues? Do you talk back to Carl Alice? I mean, how do you get this much needed feedback and interaction about what could have been done different or what to do in the future?
Yeah, so I have kind of a trusted circle of friends who are kind of at a relatively similar stage in practice. And I will typically kind of just call up one of them. And, I think this concept of, I think it's a little freeing to me because it's no one associated with work. It's no one that, I'm afraid of disappointing. They're
Sure.
just someone who's a comrade at arms.
Sure.
Right. And this idea of psychological safety is, I think, really important, and for me at least, who are you willing to show your vulnerable belly to, right? And if they wanted to, they could stick the knife in and pull, right? And, I'm not saying that people do that on purpose. I think when you're really vulnerable and going through something really hard, an offhanded comment can be really difficult and painful. And you turn it over in your head and you turn it into something it wasn't meant to be, or at least I do. And so I think at least in the very beginning when it's the most raw, I think, turning to a pretty selected group of friends who have gone through this. My family is supportive, my fiance is really supportive, and, they certainly know that my heart is in the right place, but they don't really understand what a guide dissection is.
Sure.
So talking to people who have been through it and will be honest with you, right? Like I don't want to just hear, oh, you did everything perfect. Like I think we all like to flagellate ourselves emotionally at least a little bit. Um, and so, but to do that in a way that's psychologically safe, I think is important to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And obviously you want to know who you talk to, the people you trust, and who have your best interest in mind as well versus, and you're right, it doesn't have to be intentional, but at the same time, something maybe a little more outspoken, so to speak, in areas like this, for good or for bad reasons. So how about when things go well? Which, the majority of times, and, it's what happens. How much does that affect you? Does it make you want to take more risks, do more complex cases? How do you continue to learn now that you've been in practice for a few years? People get to know you now. You have created the infrastructure, the atmosphere, the trust. How do you see yourself going forward and learning and growing even more?
Yeah. So really important and it's so much harder now in practice than when I was a fellow. So I think there's 3 ways that I do that. So first is when I have something that I've read about, or I've seen a video, or I know a friend knows how to do, and I'm looking for the right opportunity, right? So that's one way. And so I wanted to start tapping patients, not subxiphoid, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not really done in my lab or really any lab that I'd practiced in. Pretty much everywhere I had
apical and
trained, apical, peristernal, like I wanted to be free of the liver. I didn't want to take any more liver biopsies during compressions, like that sort of thing. So I watched a bunch of videos. I read about it. A friend, Rion Davies, does a lot of these. I talked to her about it a couple times. And then I was just on the hunt for the right clinical scenario because I knew that if in my first one I dropped a lung, that would be my last one.
Yeah.
So I was just waiting for the right patient to come along. And, eventually I ended up in a patient who unfortunately had a solid cancer, had a malignant effusion, and had tumor in their left lung. So there wasn't much lung to collapse and didn't have a subxiphoid window. So perfect. And, it went, and it was like, okay, this is the patient I've been waiting. And so, but I also said, okay, I'm doing something I've never done before. So I called up my friendly CT surgery, attending or the ICU attending. I was like, hey, you put in chest tubes, right? And they're like, yes. And I was like, great. So I'm going to do something I've never done before. And if I need you, I'll call you. And it went great. And then, I had kind of another 2 in rapid succession. And then now I'm just putting drains in all over the chest. And so I think for me, it was being ready when the right circumstance came in. So that's one way I learn is when I see something, I see it at a meeting or a friend talks about it and how they're doing a case. I say, I want to try that. And I just wait until I have the right situation. I think another way that I try to evolve and learn is with new equipment. So I have a rule with new equipment. I'll try any piece of equipment 3 times before I decide if I like it or I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first time I think many of us, even if we don't admit it to ourselves, change is hard. And so if you've used a run-through wire your entire life and someone hands you a Monamo, it's just different. And so the first time I try something, it's just different and that's uncomfortable. And the second time I try it, it's still different, but maybe I'm understanding it a little better. And the third time, I think I've let go of the differentness and I'm actually able to see how I like it. So I try to be very open about trying new equipment. I try to give it multiple chances. And recently I was, so we're a Philips lab primarily, so we have Volcano IVUS, and I wanted to get into rotational IVUS. We don't have Boston in my lab, and so I was like, let me just try this Refinity. I've never really done this, and like the setup has been a barrier. So I had the rep come in, I did 10 cases. And now I know how to use it. I still don't like it. But now I know that I don't like it for reasons. So, I think forcing myself to get over the newness of equipment to really like try to pick up new skills that way. And then I think the third way I learn is from cases, from patients who teach me from my struggles. By definition, as my friend Jared Purcell will say, the last thing you did is the thing that worked. How many things did you do to get there? And so, just like small things in practice, how quickly do I drop a Suzuki when I'm trying to recross into a side branch? When do I need to, escalate? I had a case yesterday where, I actually had to use a Pilot 200 to rewire into a side branch. And as I'm pulling the jailed wire, I'm watching the Pilot 200 get deeper and deeper. So I'm actually pulling the Pilot back. And I was like, I've seen this show before. I've seen that distal wire before, and we're not going to do that today. And so kind of learning from previous cases, previous struggles.
And actually, I love the point about the new equipment and actually how open are you? Because many people, they don't want to use, for example, the wire, right? Everyone uses the same wire forever and ever again. And I must say, my approach has been actually like yours. It's like something comes new, I always want to try it. And, I don't have a rule of three, but, try it a few times before you, have a point. But are you open to everything? Will you try everything new, or will you just selective in what things that you want to try or not?
I'm pretty open. I'm this sort of person, if I'm using the same wire when I retire as I am right now, like that's an unsuccessful career to me. Like the technology is moving, right? You need to move with it, and so I'm pretty open to trying new things. Gosh, I tape my radial sheaths different than I did when I started my job because I saw the way that someone else did it. And I was like, oh, let me try that. Oh, that's a little better. I do my right heart caths in a slightly different order than when I started because it's like, I can cut out 15 seconds here and 30 seconds there. So I think everything I do in the lab, I'm trying to think, why am I doing this? And is there any, and that goes from taping a radial sheath to, doing, multi-vessel atherectomy, trifurcation stenting sort of cases. I'll give it a whirl.
Well, I think that's a characteristic of people who do this line of work, right? You have to keep up because things will change and new devices will come in, and then you'll see something in meetings and you will want to try it, and that's how you evolve. Do you keep a note? Like some people I know, when they do something different, they put a note to remember themselves, or you go to their meeting, they put a little note somewhere. Do you do that, or you just keep it all?
Oh, I really should. I did when I started. I had this beautiful spreadsheet of my PCIs, and if they had a particularly interesting thing, and I wasn't able to maintain that with my clinical volume. I think, being in private practice is also different, right? So I never imagined myself being in private practice. So it's just a little different than kind of how I imagine life in an academic setting. And so, there's a little bit more doing cases and a little less spreadsheet keeping, but I absolutely should. And I think there is now electronically ways to do that I should be taking better advantage of. Because I'll fluoro store things. I'll be like, oh, that's cool, fluoro store. I was doing a CTO with one of my partners, and he did the thing where you wiggle the wiggle wire. Mm-hmm. Like I'll use a wiggle wire, whenever for support, but I never do the thing where you actually wiggle the wiggle wire and then the device creeps in. Mm-hmm. I was like, this is so cool, because I would have put a guide extension down and like to get over a stent edge.
Sure.
And fluoro store, and I'm sure that cases, it's already like gone. But there's a cool fluoro store somewhere in the computer.
Well, you never know. But I mean, again, as you said, you evolve, right? You do something different now. And from the places, Piedmont is, although it's a private, also it's a lot of academic, a lot of research and everything else. It's not that private in the sense of only doing clinical work. So you still have a lot of opportunities. Many people there who do very, very good work on research as well. Now, going forward, what excites you the most right now?
So I think one of the things that I find really exciting is, so when I started, so it's just funny when the statistics come out. I graduated med school 2013. In that year, under 4% of interventional cardiologists were women. Practicing interventional cardiologists were women. 3.5%, something like that. And that's double now on the most recent. I find that really exciting. You know, and I think there is an openness to diversity in our field that has never been there before, and not just women, right?
That's right.
All sorts of people who have not seen themselves reflected in our community, right? Not just on the podium, but in the audience, right?
Sure.
In our community. And I think there is so much talent out there that as a field we're missing, because we are missing so many great people. And when you ask, a lot of the research has been done on women, and so I don't mean to focus on just that group, but that's where a lot of this has been done. It comes down to, people say, why don't women want to be interventional cardiologists? Is it STEMI? Well, babies are born at all sorts of hours, right? Is it, radiation exposure? Well, sure, but maybe that's an education gap. I think to me, what it comes down to, and what it comes down to people who respond to surveys is culture, right? Lack of mentorship, lack of feeling of belonging. And I think that's really starting to change in ways that I can see, and I know that that's intentional from leaders like yourself. But it's just, you kind of start to feel it everywhere. I mean, I rode up here in an elevator with, a young woman who's going to be a CHIP fellow next year. So, it's just, and I think that's another piece that I think CHIP and CTO has really attracted me, is that there's not a lot of gatekeeping in our specialty. And I think that's another reason that I think women seem to kind of tend toward this space, is that, for me, I felt when I came into this space, I was like, if you want to do this work, if you want to go through the pain and suffering of these cases, by all means, sit next to me and I will help you do that, because it is hard and we are here for each other. So I am really excited about, I think there's been a focus on diversity for a while, but I think we're starting to see the needle move a little bit. And I think while I think selfishly, as a member of our profession, that makes our profession so much richer, I think ultimately what really matters is our patients will get better care.
No, I think it goes both ways. And I think part of it, the role models as well, right? You said back 10 years ago, there were few, actually there was no, if I remember, there was no CTO PCI women operator. Now there are several, Rasi, Mara, Alison Hall, Kerry. I mean, there's so many people, yourself. So it's changing. And I think also having the role model, seeing yourself potentially in the shoes of someone else, I mean, that can help. Plus there are more mentors, I guess, to help bridge that. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more. Still, the number I think is what, 8%. It's still not, but I guess it will take some time. But I do see in the courses there are many more women fellows who are deciding to go into both intervention, but also the other subspecialties of intervention. So maybe you are making a dent over there.
Well, I mean, and I think for me, you ask what is like your mission statement for like Katherine Kunkel Incorporated. And I think one of my mission statements is, helping people see themselves, in the people who are actually out there doing this stuff, and it's really important to me to be accessible. If someone DMs me on Twitter and says, hey, I'm a fellow, can we talk about, should I go into interventional? I will hop on the phone and, take my dog on a walk around the park and, have a conversation with a stranger, because that's how it all started for me. Someone did that for me. And I think, that's how we just build a network and grow, by being accessible.
Absolutely. Now, how do you keep yourself? You have a busy practice, a lot of increasing responsibilities and meetings and presentations. How do you keep sane, and how do you keep yourself in good shape to be able to handle all these pressures?
Yeah. So I would be lying if I said I'm particularly good about that. But I think it's a work in progress for me. I think, something that has stuck with me is something that Bill Lombardi says. He says, and I think I heard him say it once, and it was just like, wow, when someone says something really true, you're like, that's true. He said, every yes is a no. Thought about that. And to me, that doesn't mean like, don't do that extra case or don't go to CTO plus. But I think what it means is be conscious of the choices you're making. I, for one, am guilty of just making choices by default. You say, do you want to do something? Yes. What a great opportunity. Do you want to, be the site PI for this trial? Yes. That sounds great. Do you want to write this chapter? Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. And I don't think that means to say no to those things, but I think it means to be conscious of that you're choosing and kind of what choices you're making changes as your circumstances changes. I think for me, it's really important to me to be outside for some period of time, and that often takes the form of walking my dog. Being outside is like one of those super refreshing, recharging things for me. So I live near a park. The last several places, I will only live in walking distance to a park where I can get out and walk my dog and be outside. And so trying to be intentional about those choices and saying, the laundry needs to be folded. I can put the dishes away, but the choice I'm making right now is for my mental health and to go outside and take a walk with my dog, and I think, I'm engaged. I think, my fiance and I, we love to do things like go out to eat. We're part of a supper club in Atlanta. We both have the attitude of let's grab life and say yes and do these things, but also trying to be protective of no, we're blocking off this morning. This is just some quiet time for us. So I think trying to find balance is hard. I don't think there's really ever any such thing. The closest I can get is being intentional.
Perfect. And I think that's very true. You do something that means less time for something else, and that something might change over time and as priorities evolve. Which is your favorite book or favorite movie?
So I am a lifelong lover of crappy fiction.
What is that?
Very I describe my read, and I'm kind of a fairly voracious reader. Like when you go to Costco and they're selling like those mass market paperbacks, that's my jam.
Okay.
So right now I just finished the 15th book in the Inspector Gamache series, which is, a cozy little town in rural Quebec, which has an alarming number of murders that we need to solve. So I think for me, reading is kind of almost a form of escapism. It's a place where you can go to be with friends who only exist on paper, and you can kind of be part of that world for a little bit. And that's something that's just kind of takes me completely out of my day-to-day stresses and worries about cardiology and medicine, and life, and kind of offers a respite there.
Sure.
I think movie-wise, I am a child of the early 90s. So I love rom-coms and then action movies that have lots of explosions and car chases. Think like True Lies.
Perfect. That works well for intervention. Same thing we do.
Exactly.
So, how many hours do you sleep every day, every night?
Oh, yeah, I try to be good to get at least 6 hours of sleep. I try pretty hard. Usually 7. I have to be fairly disciplined about it. Now, again, that's a choice. So I just moved. There are boxes everywhere. But I will often say, I'm going to go to bed, and the box will still be there tomorrow, and that's okay.
Perfect. Looks like you made it a real good way of life that yes is no. It looks like you're applying it on a day-to-day, which is a huge step forward. When it comes to the things that you've done so far that you are the most proud of, what would you say those things are, both personally and professionally?
Yeah. I think personally, I think one of the things I'm the most proud of is really, I have understood my need for balance at I think maybe a little younger age that some people do. I had, when I was a fellow, one of my junior fellows actually described happiness to me, and he's like, it's like a bucket with compartments, right? And you have to figure out the size of each compartment and what each compartment is to you. And what that means to me is when one compartment's totally full and the others are all empty, right? That's still, the bucket's overall pretty dry, right?
Mm.
And I think what I've figured out is, I have a medium-sized work bucket. I think there are people whose are bigger and there are people whose are smaller. But even when everything is perfect at work, if all the other parts of my life are empty, and I've lived that life, I've had parts of that, there's only so much happiness you can really have. So one of the things I'm really proud of myself is just recognizing that about myself and saying, I need to invest in these other things. And I look at myself 2 years ago versus now, and I'm a much happier person, I think, for having done that. I think professionally, what am I most proud of? I think probably two things. I think it's the women that I've helped kind of mentor and set role model and sponsor when I can. Whenever you're in a room with other people and you need to put someone forward, trying to elevate others, I think that's incredibly important to me. And then it comes down to patience. I'm definitely one of those people who it tends to not just be a left maid. It tends to be, a 55-year-old who likes to cook Italian. And so for me, I tend to really connect to my patients and their families, and that's important to me. I think it gives me my work meaning. I think if I'm just fixing a right coronary artery, it kind of starts to lose a little bit of the meaning. And then I see my patients back, or I get notes from patients who aren't mine, but I fix their arteries, and it gives it all so much meaning, and I think, my dad's a physician also. And so he described practicing medicine as like, it's like, you put your hand in a bucket of water. You feel so important. You're doing this, but when you take your hand out, there's no gap when you're gone. Someone else will fill it in. And it's like that idea of like the starfish on the beach, right? You made a difference to that one.
Sure.
And so I think for me, that's really freeing, is I'm not that important. In the grand scheme of all of the blocked arteries and all of the patients in all of the world, we all are just doing our best for that one in front of us right now. And if you can make a difference for that person, then maybe your life really had some purpose.
That's so true, and you're right. We tend to forget sometimes. We get into the anatomic difficulties, the JCTO score, the calcification, tortuosity, lesion length, and we forget that actually this is a mother, father, or a person who has other things going on, and for them, obviously, their health is critical for them and for their family or their team as well. Now, if you had to give some advice to people who are early stage, they're finishing or starting their fellowship or early career, based on the things that you've learned and quite a bit, what would you advise them to do if they decide to follow this path of work?
So I go back to something my dad taught me, and when I was young, so he's a cardiac anesthesiologist, I would roll my eyes so much I would like hurt me. I was rolling them so hard. He would say if it was easy, they'd do it through the drive-through at McDonald's. I didn't know what that meant. And I know what that means now. It means it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. That's why we did the school, the years and years and years of training, and then the extra training after that, and it's practice. It's okay that it's hard. I just, you finish a case and you just feel sometimes defeated, or you just feel like I'm limping out. Like I won, but it went back and forth a couple times there, and it's supposed to be hard. It's okay that it's hard. I think I feel lucky that I had someone telling me that, and I think it normalizes that this isn't easy. I think, I think we all take our failures and our complications pretty personally. At least I certainly do. And I think it's supposed to be hard. That's why we're doing this. We're taking patients who didn't have other options, right? Like, sometimes it feels like you are the last stop on this train route. And it's okay to be hard. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to question, why am I not just prescribing statins? I could be talking to people about, riding more Peloton. Instead I've been drilling at this left main for how many hours? But what we do matters to the individual person, and it's okay to limp out sometimes and come back to fight again another day.
Wonderful. Well, again, Katherine, that was a lot of insight for people. I think people can learn from your journey, spending the extra time, the effort, and all this advice about what is important, what is not, the yeses, the nos, that yes, it's going to be hard otherwise. And actually, that's why I think we don't have that many. And that's still, structurally, you cannot find a job, but coronary and CTO complex, you will find a job because there's few people who go into this. So what is the hard part, which is the complexity, the stress, the complications, may actually be a good thing in terms of less people who are getting into this area and more availability for jobs for those who decide to do so. Mm-hmm. Thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to working with you more in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Sensei podcast.